Hello and welcome to another edition of Free Spirits. Joining me, Andrew Allison, is Philip Davies. Philip is the Conservative MP for Shipley in West Yorkshire, and he also serves on the Freedom Association's Council and Management Committee. Thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure.
I was thinking earlier this afternoon, the last time we did a recording together was in February last year. It was actually February the 25th last year in your office in Portcullis House. And so much has changed since then. I mean, we couldn't have envisaged the sheer loss of freedom that we've had in this past 12 months. The economic damage that has been done to the country is being hidden, I think, because of the furlough scheme. So many people are there basically getting very expensive unemployment benefit, job seekers allowance. Now, as we look forward, in fact, is that the word? Should we be looking forward to Boris's statement on Monday, or do you think we're just looking ahead to it? How optimistic are you that our freedoms will be returned in a timely manner?
It's a good question, Andrew, and I don't know is the honest answer. I have a feeling that I'm going to be underwhelmed. That's my hunch. I have a feeling that most people's reaction at the end of it will be, "Is that it?" But I'm forever optimistic. So who knows? I could be pleasantly surprised. But my realistic expectation is that those of us like me who want the country and the economy to reopen speedily are probably going to be somewhat disappointed.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are talk of leaks, but I mean, the leaks are coming straight out of Downing Street. I mean, the government to me is just flying a kite here, trying to see how acceptable some of its policies are going to be to the population at large. I mean, I'll just read something here that I just picked up in the press, and it was saying that in the week leading up to Good Friday, which is the 2nd of April this year, if there's no significant rise in the R number or infections, then hospitality businesses, including hotels, restaurants and pubs, could open their doors again for the Easter weekend. Well, it's just not quite as simple as that. You can't brew beer overnight. It takes a couple of weeks to be able to do that. It then needs to go to the various pubs and restaurants. In the case of real ale, it needs to settle in the cellar before you can actually do it. And in the case of restaurants, they need to know. You can't just say to a restaurant, "Oh, you can open tomorrow." Well, where they're going to get their ingredients from. You know, businesses, particularly in the hospitality industry, which have been closed in where I live in Beverley in the East Riding of Yorkshire since the 5th of November, that's 3.5 months. They need a definite date when they can open. You can't just say, well, if this goes right this week, then in about 2 days' time you can open. It's just not feasible, is it?
No, you're right. And the government said a while ago that, they appreciated that schools needed a couple of weeks' notice before they could open. Well, that applies absolutely across the board to other industries. People need some notice of when they can open, and people are desperate to open. I think the government, need to realise that, I've always been against the lockdowns and these arbitrary restrictions, most of which make absolutely no sense whatsoever. But I think that the government needs to be aware that public opinion is changing rapidly here since the vaccination. For the general public, the vaccination changes everything. And it's no good telling people, you've been vaccinated and then say to them, "Oh, but by the way, you still can't go out anywhere." I mean, that equation just isn't going to wash. And so I think the government need to be mindful of that. And I think they need to get the skates on. And I think the public will be expecting the restrictions to be lifted as rapidly as the vaccination's been rolled out.
Well, that was the whole point of it, wasn't it? That's what the government said, what the health secretary said last year. There's light at the end of the tunnel now, he said. Once the vaccination rollout is there, I'm going to talk about the 4 vulnerable categories, those cohorts of people which have basically now been vaccinated. My mother's been vaccinated. She's 79. She had it about 3 weeks ago. I've got lots of aunts and uncles in their 70s, and they've all been vaccinated. So they should have some immunity to it now, and they should be allowed to lead their lives. I mean, why should my mother be prevented from seeing her grandson? She hasn't seen her 4-year-old grandson since beginning of August last year. And the way that the government is speaking is to say, well, you don't really stand much of a chance of seeing him again for about until July or something. And I just cannot see people accepting that.
No, I agree, and they won't. I mean, it's and the whole categories of people who will whose patience has already run out, but will wear very thin if the government don't move things quickly. You know, people whose jobs are being lost, people whose businesses are being collapsed, whose livelihoods are at stake. You know, they're not going to tolerate being told that, well, we've just got to wait a bit longer and just wait a bit longer. They can't wait any longer. You know, some people have had no support at all, no income at all for a year. And, you know, I don't know how many of us could cope without any income at all for a year. But, you know, we've expected it of so many people. It's just completely unacceptable. But look, the point here is, Andrew, that, you know, I've always made the point that Public Health England and the scientists are never going to say to the government, right, we now think you should withdraw these restrictions. It's just not. If people are waiting for that to happen, they'll be waiting forever. These people want to hold on to these restrictions for as long as possible. And these restrictions will only end when either the government stands up to the scientists or Parliament stands up to the government. That's the only possible route out of this. And the government have got to do their bit. They've got to say to the scientists, well, thank you very much. We listen to what you've got to say, but we're now making a decision that we think on balance, we've got to get the economy going and people's lives have got to be lived again. And we're already seeing the goalposts changing. You know, before, we started off with these lockdowns that we needed it to build capacity in the NHS. Then we've got the latest lockdown in order to stop the NHS from being overwhelmed. Now the cases in hospital are going through the floor. It's now, well, we've got to get the infection rate below a certain level. Well, why? If people who are going to fall ill to the virus have been vaccinated to stop them from being seriously ill or dying, why does it matter how many people have got the virus out in the local community if it's not going to do people any harm? This is just an attempt to move the goalposts to keep the restrictions in place longer. And of course, what they're proposing to do is ramp up the testing. Well, if you ramp up the testing, you're going to ramp up the number of people you find with the infection. So this is all a ploy by Public Health England and the scientists to keep these restrictions in place for as long as possible. But the level of infections is completely irrelevant when people have been vaccinated.
Yeah, advisors advise and ministers decide, and that's what the government's got to realise. In our monthly members' newsletter last month, The Free Nation, your colleague, Chris Green, MP for Bolton West, was commenting on things like there hasn't been a proper cost-benefit analysis to all of this. We hear from ministers that we must eradicate the virus. Well, that is just completely impossible. I mean, by the time we even knew about this virus at the beginning of this year, it had probably gone halfway around the world in one way or another. So we do have to sort of balance all these things out. And my big worry, and it always has been for two industries really, and that is hospitality and also people in events, which could be sort of in the same category, but I want to sort of separate them really. Because if you're someone who has hosts wedding receptions and things like that, or if you host conferences, you have not been able to do anything at all since March last year. I mean, I've already touched upon pubs being closed in my area for the last 3.5 months, and I know that the British Beer and Pub Association commented about 3 weeks ago that some of these wet-led pubs, as they like to call them, they don't serve food, hadn't even received payments for the November lockdown. Never mind the lockdown just after Christmas. I mean, are you getting that from businesses in your constituency that this money is very, very slow to come through to them?
Yes, very much so. And I mean, the money goes from the government to the local authority, and then the local authority distributes it incredibly slowly. And they clearly have no understanding of how much this money is needed to keep going. And it is a massive issue. But you're absolutely right. I've got a number of breweries in my constituency, and they are obviously going through a torrid time at the moment, and they always say there's light at the end of the tunnel. Unfortunately, it seems to be a very long tunnel. That's the problem, and the speck of light at the end of it. Funnily enough, it seems to me that from the start of this year, as the vaccine's been rolled out, the tunnel seems to have been getting longer and longer to actually get out the other end. So that equation is one that I don't understand, and I don't think many people understand. And businesses, these businesses can't hang on for much longer, to be perfectly honest. I mean, it's not as if pubs, for example, just take pubs as an example, it's not as if the pub industry was massively thriving beforehand. I mean, we were in a situation whereby pubs, a certain number of pubs and clubs were already closing down every week as it was before we had the virus. So, this scorched earth policy that we've been pursuing as a country, I mean, I really do worry what will be left at the end of it all.
Yeah, well, I mean, the furlough scheme really is just a very expensive unemployment benefit, really. We don't know quite how bad the economic devastation is going to be. I felt that the Bank of England was rather optimistic last week in its analysis. Yes, there will be some industries that will bounce back better than others. And no doubt, say a pub chain like JD Wetherspoon, I was listening to Tim Martin a couple of days ago. He's got enough in reserve. That company can come back. But what about your local pub? So just an owner manager. What's it called? Free house. What about someone like that? What about someone who runs a small hotel privately, a B&B? How are these people going to survive? And I think this is going to be, this is going to be a major issue as we go into the year. And I think that the longer that the government prolongs this, because it is, and it's prolonging an agony that I don't think it really needs to do. I'll diverge slightly here and just look at schools. As you correctly said, Boris said he would give schools 2 weeks. Now, all the teachers that I know are really eager to get the kids back in the classroom. They really want it. Because at the moment, they've got some kids in the classroom and they're trying to do home learning with others. And the workload on them is massive. They want them in the classroom. So why does a school need 2 weeks to reopen when effectively it already is open? And it's just a matter of getting the numbers back up again when they've got all the COVID restrictions in place. So I can't see why there's been this big delay on the reopening of schools.
Yeah, no, I don't think schools should have been closed throughout this
I agree
process.
with you entirely, yeah.
The government should have held the nerve and kept them open. The damage that's being done to children's education, and it's not just their education, to be perfectly honest, although that's bad enough. But it's the social development of children. They should be out at school with their peers. And it's I think the devastation that we're going to have in terms of the mental health impacts on young people and children and all the rest of it. This will be felt for many, many years to come. People are struggling. They shouldn't be cooped up at home, all the time. And it's just not a natural state of being for children. And I really do worry about what we've going to have left behind for us in terms of the educational attainment and the social development of pupils.
Yeah, it's the social side of it that worries me. I mean, I've got a 4.5-year-old son. He's always been bright, Philip. I know every parent says that, but he has. He can read very well for his age. He can count very well. In fact, he can count backwards from 100 to 0, just like that. So on that side of things, he's not really losing out. I mean, I do sort of bits of homeschooling with, phonics and maths and things like that. But his behaviour since the beginning of January has got decidedly worse. And I know that he's been really affected by it. But then his mum and me are being affected by it. In November, I started feeling very anxious. Went to the doctor and she prescribed me what she described as a mild antidepressant. I've never had any mental health issues in my life before, but just not being able to lead my life the way that I normally do it, going to London to visit people like you. I'm also a church organist. I mean, I've barely played the organ in the past year because that's another part of my life. And people ask you, well, where's your support network? Well, that's where all my support network is. It's through the work I do in politics, through people at church and friends around me. And I'm just not seeing them anymore. And you just can't keep on going on like this, because it's having a severe effect on people's mental health. No doubt suicides. I think suicides are on the rise. Maybe you know a bit more about it than I do, but by what I've read, it looks like they are. And then you look at people's lives being completely ruined because they're losing their jobs, they're losing their businesses, they can't keep their mortgage repayments. And I think the government's just got to realise that if you prolong this and you try to stretch this out and say, well, you can't really visit your family and friends until July, and pubs might be opening in May, but or might even be opening in April. But the longer they do this, it's not just the economic damage, although I do remind people, as I'm sure you do, that our whole lives are dependent on the economy. Our livelihoods, our ability to be able to put a roof over our head and feed and clothe ourselves and our children depends on the economy. But it's also the mental side of it. It's a form of torture. And the government really should be speedily trying to end this torture as more and more people get the vaccine.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no excuse not to reopen the everything quickly. And like I said, throughout this thing, there's been no logic applied to anything. All these decisions have been completely arbitrary. So, for instance, the scientists have all said right from the word go that the chances of catching the virus outdoors are very slim. This is at the start when we didn't have a vaccine or anything. So, what on earth could be the reason for not allowing people to go out and do outdoor sports, outdoor pursuits, to allow crowds to go and visit sporting events outside? There's literally no reason whatsoever. We're now getting to the point where, unfortunately, it seems that some people at the heart of the decision making seem to have gone power mad and are actually enjoying the power that they are wielding over everybody's lives. I think you've got, the scientists and people at Public Health England who are rather enjoying the spotlight a bit too much. No one's ever heard of them before and probably won't ever hear of them again. And so their moment in the limelight, they're lapping up for all it's worth. And they're not going to give over this control easily. It's human nature in any walk of life where people have a huge amount of power and control. They don't tend to give it away easily. And that's the situation that we seem to be in at the moment with people at the Department of Health and the scientists. They've got huge control over people's lives and they are not going to give it up lightly. That's what I fear is that, this is where the Prime Minister has got to overrule these people and say, actually, we've got to get the country going again. And, really the Prime Minister's got to take charge of this and actually overrule the people at the Department of Health who have always craved controlling people's lives.
Yeah, very much so. And I met a scientist who was giving evidence at the Science and Technology Committee a couple of days ago, did say that the chances of transmission of COVID on a crowded beach was negligible. Well, in which case then, we're half term now. Why didn't the government say, well, people are particularly going to go on the beach, but why can't they go to wildlife parks and zoos and, give the kids something to do rather than just being forced indoors just about all the time? I think my roadmap would be a speedy roadmap, much speedier than what the government's likely to announce. I would agree, but all these outdoor things that you've just said, I think the restrictions should simply go. It's actually good for people's well-being to be out in the great outdoors and doing different things and doing exercise and enjoying the sports that they love. Golf, for example. I think golf was banned, wasn't it? About the most socially distant sport you can think of. There's absolutely no reason to do that. I will get the schools back much sooner. I think it's probably far too late now to say they're going back on Monday, but I certainly think that they should be back at the beginning of March. I don't think they should be waiting another week for that. And I'd like to see all schools back as well, Philip. This idea of delaying it for another week or two for secondary school pupils and then go back to school for a week or two and then have 2 weeks off at Easter, I don't really see the logic in that. If you're going to send them back for a month or at least get themselves settled back into to education. And that's certainly wanting to see the very speedy return of the hospitality industry and what they call non-essential shops. I love that one. You know, clothes shops are apparently non-essential. Now, I'm sure viewers to this podcast are very pleased that we are fully clothed, Philip. Or maybe they're not, I don't know. But anyone who decides that clothes are non-essential, I don't know if you remember when they had that fire break lockdown in Wales, and the government said that the supermarkets couldn't sell non-essential items. And a bloke went into his local Tesco and just his boxer shorts. He said, well, you're saying that clothes are non-essential. Very funny, but made a valid point. But certainly, I mean, realistically, I think by Easter, the government has really got to open this economy again and not delay it.
Absolutely. I can assure you that if I was sat here with no clothes on, there'd certainly be more people laughing than crying. That is for sure, Andrew. But yeah, look, absolutely. There's no. I mean, you know, the Prime Minister. It seems to me that the watchword for the Prime Minister, the stock-in phrase. I think the Prime Minister always has his particular turn of phrase for all these things, and it seems that the one that seems to be coming up every so often is cautious but irreversible. Cautious but irreversible is the government stock-in phrase. Well, you know, my advice to the Prime Minister is not to get, you know, irreversible. Yes, I'm all for that. I'm 50% of the way with him. Irreversible. Yes, we must never ever allow the government to impose these controls and restrictions on our lives ever again. So yes, I'm with him on irreversible, but cautious, absolutely not. He needs to stop being overly cautious. There's nothing to be cautious for. That's the whole point of the vaccine. What on earth is the point of the vaccine if we're still going to keep everybody under control and say you've had the vaccine, but actually you still can't go to the pub, you still can't go into these shops, and you still can't go and watch a football match. What on earth was the point of it all if that's what the government are going to say? It's completely senseless. And so I hope that the Prime Minister will say to the cautious scientists and Public Health England that actually, you know, he's not prepared to wait as long as they would want us to. I really hope he will do that. But I'm afraid I don't hold out any great hope.
No, I mean, you've touched upon something there which sort of leads us onto another subject and probably towards the end of this podcast, really, Philip. And it's all to do with the restrictions and will this happen again? I mean, the next time you get a very bad winter flu season, what if there was a particularly bad winter flu season? Is the government going to try and close the economy down again? And, you know, we're campaigning for that the Coronavirus Act should not be renewed again, which will be, I think, right at the end of March, won't it? If I've got that right, just before Easter. And I think if the government feels that certain restrictions should be in place, then it should present what restrictions it feels needs to be in place to Parliament and let parliamentarians decide. But at the moment, it's just been a huge power grab from the centre where you have Matt Hancock from his office in Westminster just basically pulling the levers and pressing the buttons and having an enormous sway over people's lives. And that cannot be allowed to happen again.
No, it mustn't. But I mean, personally, now that, you see, I don't think really in their wildest dreams that they ever felt that the public would be so compliant in putting up with these state controls. I think they thought, well, yes, you can do that in China, but you'll never get away with it in the United Kingdom. And I think they were pleasantly surprised at how compliant the British people have been with these controls. Personally, I found it very chilling at how easily the state have been able to frighten people into giving up their freedoms. But what I fear is that once it's been shown that the public will tolerate this to a greater or lesser extent, the temptation will be for these people that they will say, well, we did this before, people went with it before, we'll do it again. And I certainly fully expect this winter, even if we get to the point where the government's finally plucked up the courage to give us our freedoms back, I genuinely fear that there will be an attempt this winter to even though the Prime Minister talks about being irreversible, I suspect there will be an attempt by people in the health lobby to introduce restrictions again over the winter months in order to save the NHS. That, you know, that will be again the rallying cry for bringing in more restrictions, and that's got to be resisted. And you know, I think that the government must start addressing the question as to, well, why is the NHS being overwhelmed? You know, I asked the House of Commons Library about this, asking about how many general and acute hospital beds there have been over the years. You know, they said to me that in 1987, 1988, there were 181,000 general and acute beds, hospital beds, and 297,364 beds overall in the NHS. Whereas now there is a total of 120,828 beds in the NHS. And obviously, despite there being an increase in the population in that time, there's been a massive decrease in the number of hospital beds, despite, of course, the NHS budget going through the roof over that time. So I think, you know, somebody's got to be asking the question as to, you know, why is there such little resilience in the NHS? And that the solution is for the Department of Health and the NHS to sort themselves out, rather than asking the country every winter to save the NHS. As you know, one of my constituents put it very neatly to me when she said to me that she thought the NHS was there to save us rather than us being there to save the NHS. But I suspect now they've got the taste for it, they're going to come back for this in the future. And so when the Prime Minister says this is irreversible, I hope he's right, because he will certainly come under pressure in the future to bring these things back again.
Yeah, well, you made two good points there, and it was also one of those points was made by Chris Green in his article for the Free Nation. And if the Coronavirus Act is given an extension until September, then by the time you get to the end of September, and we all know what happens, the kids go back to school, everyone's got colds and sneezes and things like that. The temptation will be to say, well, no, we really need to sort of extend this again until the end of March, just because we need to protect the NHS. And that's a very good reason why these restrictions do need to go much sooner rather than later. But also the other point that you raise is correct. Every year the NHS has a winter crisis. I mean, it's you know, it's as predictable as the flowers blossoming in spring. Really, it just happens every year, and we've got to ask that why. And you quite rightly, I mean, I've read those similar statistics. So the number of NHS beds has gone down by, I think, about a third, 25%, 30%, around about that figure maybe. And yet the expenditure has increased. And why? When I once described the NHS a few years ago as crumbling under the weight of its own bureaucracy, because I think that's basically what it does, or what is happening rather. So I think that there does need to be a big reform of the NHS, and I know the government is looking to do that. But I can't say that I'm going to be particularly helpful there, because it is our national religion.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, the thing that's important to people is that treatment is free at the point of need. And I think that's a principle that we all subscribe to. But that doesn't mean to say that everything within it is perfect. And like I say, you know, we've certainly got an issue with the lack of resilience in the NHS. That's, you know, even by the NHS's own admission, because they're the ones telling us that they're in a crisis every winter. So somebody needs to sort out, why is it we're pouring more and more money into the NHS, and yet it's becoming less and less resilient? Somebody needs to get a grip of that. And if the Department of Health spent more time concentrating on things like that, which is their role, and less time telling everybody how to live every aspect of their lives, we actually might get somewhere. And, you know, I mean, look, even when we get to the point where we have these relaxation of restrictions, Andrew, you know, let's not forget, you know, I have a feeling that people at Public Health England are going to be pressing for social distancing to remain in place, even when all the other restrictions have been taken down. I bet you they say we've all got to keep wearing face masks. Mm-hmm. How long is that going to keep going for? I bet if they've got half a chance, they'll keep us doing that forever, to be perfectly honest, at Public Health England. You know, we've got to make sure that we get rid of all of these restrictions. We don't have, you know, people talk about the new normal. No. Yeah. We don't want the new normal. We want to go back to the old normal, not accepting that certain things are going to have changed. And I guarantee that they will cling on to things like social distancing and face masks and all this stuff forever, unless we make a concerted effort to say we're not prepared to put up with this any longer.
I agree. And of course, the chief scientific officer of the Ministry of Defence said that it might become socially unacceptable to go to work with a cold. I mean that's what an utterly preposterous thing to say. And even sort of alluded to the fact that it could be a mandatory thing, that if you have a cold, it is illegal for you to go to work. Well, does that mean that when the children go back to school in September, just about every one of them gets a cold? Does that mean that we just shut the schools down for a couple of weeks until they all get over it? And I'm sure that you're right, the people in Public Health England and the health lobby in general will be really pushing for restrictions to go on pretty much for as long as they think they can get away with it. Could even be forever that they're pushing for. But before I bring it to end, though, there is one question, and it's sort of been on my mind, and it is to do with the public health lobby. The whole hospitality industry, pubs and restaurants, as we know, would be badly affected by this. They've been the first things to close down, and the last sort of part of the economy to open up again. How much of that do you think is very much a snobby type of thing from these people who are saying Britain drinks too much, therefore we would actually like Britain to drink, even though Britain is probably drinking more now because they're just getting it from Asda or Morrison's or whatever. But how much of that do you think is a snobby thing? You know, these sort of middle class Islington people don't really want to go down to the Frog and Ferret, do they, and mix with the ordinary working people.
No, I think you're onto something there. I think, you know, they would, they probably like lots of these clubs and places and pubs to close down. You know, I think you're probably right. You know, they basically want to stop anyone having any fun or anyone doing anything that they happen personally not to like themselves. And, you know, actually, on a serious point, Andrew, it's a growing trend in politics, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I don't think I was sent to Parliament in order to ban everybody else from doing all the things that I don't happen to like myself. But actually, that seems to be the growing trend amongst politicians. They seem to think that their job is literally to ban everybody else from doing all the things that they happen to think they don't like themselves or they think is bad for you. And we've got a very, very, you know, this has been a long time coming, this growing authoritarian, intolerant trend in British politics. And, you know, I think, you know, we've got to make a concerted effort to roll back this tide of authoritarianism and intolerance for anybody who does things that they don't happen to like themselves. And you know, I really worry for the future of our country because, you know, I just think it's going to be very difficult to put this authoritarian genie back in the bottle, even when we get to the point, let's hope, that these restrictions come to an end. You know, I don't think this will be the end of authoritarianism by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, I fear that you're right on that. And that's certainly the one thing that the Freedom Association is going to be really concentrating on this year. It is getting our freedoms back and fighting against this authoritarianism. As you were aware, we were supposed to be doing a free speech conference in London last year. I doubt we'll even be able to do it by June this year. I'm looking at a safer bet of September, to be perfectly honest. But these are important things that we're going to air because it has been an absolutely horrible 12 months. I mean, no two ways about it. And yes, there is a bit of an end in sight, but it seems a long, long way off. So. But thank you very much for joining me, Philip. I much appreciate that, and it's great to see you, albeit virtually. It'd be great to see you in person one of these days. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, then please consider joining the Freedom Association. You can go to our website, www.tfa.net, and you can click on the join button at the top of the page. And if you really, really do enjoy watching and listening to these podcasts, you can also click on the donate button as well to help us with our work. Until the next time, goodbye.